Hello. Thank you to everyone who tuned in yesterday. I was quite flabbergasted by the amount of views I had on TikTok, and there was a lot of new followers. So I guess that tells me I'm doing something right, I hope, with this writing course. So without further ado, today's topic, I figured it was probably time to discuss points of view when it comes to writing characters for your novel. So, the advice I would give is, and I think I mentioned this previously, but just to recap briefly. So, once you've divided your novel up into chapters, you need to decide who the chapters are pertaining to. So, for example, you might decide that chapter 1 is about your protagonist, chapter 2, the antagonist, chapter 3, back to the protagonist, chapter 4, the antagonist. Now, that's at its very simplest. You could have supporting characters who also have entire chapters based on them as well. It's a fairly simple way of doing it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a very good starting point. However, if you feel a bit more bold, what you might want to do is something a little bit more complicated. So, for example, let's say chapter 3 in the novel, you decided you just wanted to change things up a bit and make it a little bit more dangerous, for want of a better term. And let's say the beginning of chapter 3 started off with your protagonist, your hero character. Maybe, say halfway through that chapter, you might want to switch points of view. So in order to do that, you would put a section break in the chapter. And that can simply just be a space followed by 3 asterisks and then another space. And then you would start the next section of your book. But bear in mind, the next section of your book would be from the other character's point of view. And sometimes that can just help to create a kind of world, and it can also help to create that sense of danger. I'm thinking crime novels, for example, where you have the 2 opposing points of view. It works particularly well in horror genres as well. So it can nicely jigsaw things together and just give readers different viewpoints, which then build up to form a picture in their heads. So what I would suggest is that if this is your debut novel, then start with with a less is more approach. So keep it nice and simple, primarily for yourself. So if you feel bold enough to do more of the section breaks as you go on, then that's absolutely fine. But certainly as a starting point, 1 point of view per chapter is absolutely acceptable. The other thing I would just highlight is do be careful not to introduce too many points of view. Sometimes you can have different viewpoints, or different narrative viewpoints, I should say, for the whole novel. So, for example, you could have third person narrative, or you could have first person narrative, or you could have a kind of omniscient viewpoint. The problem with using omniscient viewpoints, which is basically where you're kind of godlike, you're kind of viewing everything as the writer and therefore the reader, and seeing everybody's viewpoints, it can get quite complicated if you're not used to doing it that way. So, for example, you could have 3 characters in dialogue in your very first chapter, and you're switching viewpoints every time someone says something. The problem with that is that you end up head hopping, which is the terminology for it, and that's very difficult for readers to keep track on, because suddenly they keep jumping into different people's heads. So to keep it simple, the idea is that when you write a point of view from a character point of view, the reader is inside that person's head. You're inviting them in as the writer, and they're seeing things through that character's eyes. So that's why I would always suggest that you really kind of harness it just pull the reins back on that, especially if it's your first book, and you'll find that you'll gradually get used to it, and you can complicate it more as you go on if you feel comfortable with it. But by all means, certainly avoid head hopping. It's very difficult to then undo that once you've started it, and it's an absolute headache for an editor to deal with as well. Believe me, I've been there. So you want to try and make your own life easier and your editor's job easier as well further down the line. So that's points of view. I think I think it's important just to make sure that you don't overcrowd it. It's a bit like when I was saying don't introduce too many characters, don't introduce too many points of view. If you think of it as a film, sometimes the director has to choose who is he focusing on when there's a conversation going between different characters. Does he choose this character and shoot them face on or side on, or does he choose this one? And it's a bit like you're the director here, so you decide, right, whose viewpoint is most important, who's driving this story at this particular point in time, and that will help you decide who the point of view should belong to. So I hope that's clear. I think what I'll do tomorrow is we'll move, given that we're starting to discuss a bit of dialogue in your novel, I think tomorrow we'll discuss dialogue tags, because that seems logically the next step. So thank you for listening and watching. Remember, I'm available for hire, and you can find me on TikTok, YouTube, and at www.ianskews.com. Thank you. Have a lovely day. I hope it's sunnier than where I am and here in gloomy Scotland, and this is our summer. Hey ho. Right, anyway, take care. Bye.